Well, October is prime bulb planting time in Oklahoma. And in fact, October and November, pretty much through Thanksgiving, you can get your bulbs in the ground and you'll have good results. I know a lot of people that take Thanksgiving weekend to put them in the ground. So what we're looking for is cooler temperatures. And the actual thing that you're looking for is a couple-week period where the night temperatures get in the 40s to low 50s. After you've had a couple weeks of those cooler temperatures, the soil's cooling off, that's the time to put your bulbs in the ground. So if it stays hot here in October and we have warm nights, wait a little bit longer and then put your bulbs in the ground. Now, bulbs are wonderful things, and it pays to take some time now and put some of these spring flowering bulbs in the ground. Now, while we refer to most of the things that we plant in the ground right now as bulbs, there are actually different types of structures. There are true bulbs, which is like a tulip, and a true bulb has leaves around it. You can see here that we have these layers much like an onion. An onion is a bulb as well. Now, a crocus, on the other hand, is not a bulb. It's actually technically a corm. And you can see here, as we look at it, there aren't any leaf structures. This is actually just a very short portion of a stem that happens to be underground. So corms and bulbs are technically different, but we treat them the same. And what we want to do right now is basically plant them in the ground. Now, when you plant your bulbs or corms or whatever you are planting here, your spring flowering bulbs, you want to put them in the ground 2 to 3 times their height. And you're going to measure that from the top of the bulb. So if we need to have it in there 6 inches deep, we're measuring our 6 inches from here. So our hole actually should probably be about 7 inches deep to get that in the ground. Now, before we even start planting, you want to select good bulbs. And basically, it's a pre-packaged flower. The flower is already inside. It's already there, just waiting for some chilling to go ahead and come up and bloom in the spring. So the bigger the bulb, the better your flower is going to be. So when you get those bargain tulips and they're very small bulbs, it may not be such a bargain because you may not have as nice of a bloom as you had expected. So get the larger bulbs for each bulb type and you'll really be pleased with the results. Now, you want to store them if you've bought them already or you've got them and you can't get them in the ground yet. You want to store them in a cool place. Your refrigerator is a great place to store them. However, you want to make sure that you don't have any fruit in your refrigerator, especially your apples, because they give off ethylene. And what that will do is it will cause that flower inside that bulb to abort. So if you store these in the refrigerator with your apples, you'll notice that you won't have any flowers next spring. But putting them in the refrigerator will help them stay. You also want to look at your bulbs as you're choosing them. And this is a tunic, it's an outer covering on the bulb. And the tunic can actually be torn, and that's quite all right. You want to make sure that your bulb is firm and it doesn't have any places that obviously look like they're rotting on it. And if the tunic is completely missing, then you want to make sure that your bulb hasn't dried out. It's not kind of spongy or mushy, because this tunic kind of helps to keep that bulb from getting injured. It also helps keep it from drying out. Now, if it just recently lost its tunic, then you can go ahead and plant it if it looks like the bulb is okay. But if you can find them where they've got their tunic even partially on, your bulb is probably going to be in better shape. Now, the way that you can plant your bulbs, you can do a variety of things. You can plant bulbs in your turf area. I would warn you, though, that if you're very picky about your turf, you like to keep it very weed-free, you probably won't want to put bulbs mixed into your turf, because what happens is some of the herbicides that are put on in the spring, they're not selective and you'll be killing your bulbs out. So if you're very picky about your turf, you probably don't want to mix bulbs in with your turf. However, if you're not quite so picky about that and you don't mind if it's all one type of turf, then you can put some bulbs in the ground. Now, there are several ways that you can do that, and 2 of the bulbs that lend themselves to this, the crocus, are very good for mixing in with turf. Also, grape hyacinth or muscari is a good one to put in with turf, and in some areas your daffodil bulbs will work if you're kind of trying to make a naturalized look. And these kind of bulbs kind of the size depends on what you use. Now, you can use something like this, a spading fork, and this works very well for your crocus, to kind of put that down in the ground. And again, you're going to want to do that 2 to 3 times the height of the bulb. You can do that, and then you can just drop your crocus down in there and kind of mash that back together. So that's a good way to get crocus in the ground. Now if you have larger bulbs, you might want to use something like this, a bulb planter. Now this works well in your turf. It also works well in a garden type situation. You can get a single hole for that bulb, the right depth, and then place that bulb in the bottom and recover it. Now another way, if you're doing a very large quantity of bulbs in your turf area, is to come along with something like a half moon edger and cut out, it's kind of an H in your turf, like this. And then what you do is you come in with a flat shovel and basically you roll back the sod. And I've done that ahead of time here. I did this one side. Didn't do a great job, but then what you want to do is just come in here and work your soil. And this is all underneath your turf to the proper depth. You can work that up, and then basically you've made a trench or a nice large hole. Plant your bulbs in here. This isn't very deep, but you would want it deeper. Plant your bulbs in here, then cover them back up, roll your turf back over the top, and then kind of stomp that down, and then you want to water that back in. Now your turf is going to regrow very quickly. You won't notice that you've done this in your lawn. You'll also want to water this in after you've planted it. And that's a very easy way to get your bulbs planted in turf areas. Now, while most of us probably won't be planting bulbs in turf areas, planting them in a ground cover area like this is also a really good idea. And in this case, probably your bulb planter would work best because it's not going to disturb your ground cover as much as digging a large trench. Now, if you're planting them in a bare piece of ground, you're wanting to have bulbs in your garden, you can actually dig large holes and put your bulbs in. Now, if you're planting tulips and some of those that you're just basically planting them as annuals, you're going to yank them out the next year, you're going to want to place them a lot closer together than what spacing says. Usually when you read in books, you space your tulips 6 to 8 inches apart, your daffodils 6 to even sometimes 12 inches apart. What they're thinking about when they make that recommendation is that those plants are going to be in there for several years, and they're going to crowd each other out if you start out planting them too closely together. So what we usually like is kind of an instant show from our bulbs. So you're going to want to go down to maybe 3 to 4 inches apart when you do your spacing so that you have a nice show. Now finally, as you're designing and putting your bulbs out, most of the time we kind of tend to want to plant them in a row like little soldiers all lined up, and actually that's not the best way to plant your bulbs. If you're wanting them to be more naturalized looking, what you can do, these are daffodils that we're going to put out, is take about 60% of our bulbs and plant those about 4 inches apart or so in a kind of a mass in the center. Then we're going to take 30% of these bulbs and divide those into 3 or 4 groups like this. Now we've got these and we're going to have them all spaced out here. So this is a pretty big mass here in the center. Now what we're going to do with this 30% of our bulbs is we're going to take one giant step out from our mass, and actually these would be spread out a little bit more. And we're going to come along and we're going to take a big step out like this, and we're going to space these out in this area. And then we'd come back here and maybe take a step out going this way, space them out. Now with that last 10% of the bulbs, you're going to take another step out and you're going to put 2 or 3 of those bulbs in this area. What that does is mimic nature. You have a clump in the middle and then it kind of spreads. You have some smaller clumps and then those seedlings that have just sprouted are out in the edge. And that will be a very prettier, much more naturalized look when you plant your bulbs.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.